Good morning and welcome to everyone to this City Leaders Dialogue, the road to the resilient recovery, where our principal guest will be Sir Richard Leese, the leader of the City of Manchester. Now, cities are key to ensuring the world builds back better after COVID-19. And we're aiming in this series for a better understanding about how cities can lead and innovate, not just to create a sustainable future, but also a just future, working with us at the UK's Connected Places Catapult. This series of city leader dialogues began with an interview with the Lord Mayor of Melbourne. We then continued with the Mayor of Helsinki, and we're delighted today to have Councillor Sir Richard Leese with us. There'll be an interview between myself and Sir Richard Leese, and then there will be a time for open Q&A with everyone who's joined us on the call. We look forward to all of your questions and your comments, and I know that Richard is looking forward to all the issues you want to raise with him. Now, Councillor Sir Richard Leese was elected to Manchester City Council in 1984. He became leader of the council in 1996, which was the same year that the IRA bomb caused a major explosion in the city centre. And through Richard's leadership and his pioneering approach, Manchester not only recovered from that attack, but also began two very important cycles of innovation, place leadership, and ultimately of successful repositioning and redevelopment of Manchester. Richard's political interests include devolution, place-based budgets, and the link between economic development and social policy. He's a champion of open democracy and community leadership, and he's very interested in the convening and community leadership role of local government. He's also very committed to the role of cities in creating a sustainable net zero future. In addition to being leader of the City of Manchester Council, Richard is also director of Manchester Airport Holdings. He's also deputy mayor and vice chair of the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, and he's chair of the LGA City Regions Board. Welcome to this City Leadership Dialogue, Councillor Sir Richard Leese.
Thanks, Greg. Good morning, everybody.
Richard, it's really great to have you here. It's an honor for us, and for people who know you and have tracked the incredible leadership that Manchester has had over the past 30 years. I'm sure that there's much in store here to discuss. Richard, can we begin with a kind of obvious question? The COVID pandemic has affected cities all over the world, but in different ways. What have been the most significant impacts in Manchester, and how has your city proved to be both agile and resilient?
Well, I think clearly the most obvious impact is on the health of hundreds of thousands of people, actually. And I'm not just talking about the COVID health impacts that we now have, I think, a crisis in mental health. People, over 50% of the population of Greater Manchester have reported that their well-being has suffered as a consequence. So I think there is a very great psychological impact on the city. There has clearly been some impact on the economy, and particular sectors, retail, culture, that are absolutely normally dependent on footfall. Clearly there has been no footfall. Sport's a big part of Manchester's life, so there has been that impact there. And like most cities, we have more than our fair share of deprived communities, and there has certainly been a disproportionate impact of COVID in that poorer communities with large Black, Asian, minority ethnic populations have suffered more than the population at large, and that's reflected in deaths as well. That for a pandemic of this sort, the ultimate bottom line is that matter of life and death, and far too many people have died as a consequence of COVID. Also means in recovery is we also have those communities that tend to be most resistant to vaccination as well. And perhaps one other bit of our demographic that impacts on that is we're a very young city. So for Greater Manchester, that 1/3 of the under 29s live actually in the city itself. So mixture of impacts, a health impact, particularly the mental health, the social impact, and an economic impact on the city.
Richard, I mean, it's a very sobering starting to our conversation, but absolutely correct to focus on deaths and vulnerability and health. And I think the underlying demographics that you've described that shape the way Manchester has been impacted, very important for people to understand, both the extent of the BAME community, the youth, relative youth of the city, and everything else. If we move just to thinking about the economic and mobility disruptions for a minute, is it clear in a sense what the recovery might look like in terms of future patterns of travel and future patterns of working? Is that becoming visible to you?
I think it's been visible almost all the way through, really. And one of the things that's happened in Manchester over the past 20, 25 years is that we built a far more diverse economy than the one we used to be manufacturing dominated, heavy engineering, chemicals dominated. Now a far more diverse economy, manufacturing, advanced manufacturing, strong on advanced materials, life sciences, culture, sport, very, very strong digital offer. Well, one of the biggest in Europe and fastest growing sectors in Europe, big TV, media sector. So I won't go to every single sector we've got, but we are very, very diverse. And what we've seen, that gives us a really strong base for recovery going forward. And I think what's been clear, I think pretty much all the way through, is that whilst work will change, that people want to return to work. And to a certain extent, COVID has accelerated trends around flexible working that were already there. These are not new things. So public transport will return. It is, if we want a green future, it's certainly mass transportation is absolutely key to that. We are finding that the desire of people to live in or around the city centre is probably greater than it was pre-pandemic. And of course, that has the advantage for those people. They can walk to work, most of them. So that trend is continuing. Clearly, in smaller companies, more local companies, the return to work has been faster than those companies where decision making is in London or even further away. Although some of those larger corporates are going to find themselves struggling to recruit and retain unless they start to allow particularly their younger staff back into the office. So, and we still have that talent pool. And one of the reasons Manchester has grown over the past 20 years is that we've built a city that young people want to come to, young people want to live in. And I tell you, one sector that's recovered very, very quickly is our hospitality sector. It's young people, not only young people, I go out occasionally, but largely young people want to go out, meet and enjoy their lives. So all of that is coming back. And the sectors that will struggle, there's probably only one actually that will struggle in the medium to long term, and that is the high street. I think the high street that we had pre-COVID, which was pretty much dying anyway, it has gone really. But I think we will have a different sort of high street, and one that is less dominated by big multiples, has far more room for variety, for independence, and will probably create a better city as a consequence of it. I think the other thing we've discovered is that throughout the pandemic, we've created far more space, outdoor space for cafes, restaurants, that public realm, very much more pedestrian dominated space, which is an ambition we had before COVID. As far as possible, that stuff will become permanent. It will become part of the fabric of the city. And that underpins, I think, another demand that there will be is that well-being at work will have a far greater priority than it had previously. And we're seeing that with office occupiers, that maybe 5 years ago, the ambition was still how many people can we cram into this space? Now, the ambition for most good employers is that how can we make this space effective for our people to be in and to be able to work in?
Richard, there's so many important things that you've just said, and it's been a hallmark of your leadership of the city that the economy has become so brilliantly diversified into these multiple advanced sectors. So it's good to hear that, if you like, they're coming back. Your comments about transport are very, very interesting and important. I think this combination of public transport being essential to tackle the climate challenge, which we'll come to in a minute, but also how you're using space and place to make an environment where people can be healthy. And also your comments about retail and about, how the pandemic has been an accelerator, as it were, of the decline of some kinds of face-to-face retail, but you're building a different kind of environment, a different kind of urban experience as a result. It's so fascinating, and Manchester is once again a pioneer, I think, here, and we'd love to hear more about that as the conversation goes along. Can we go immediately to the environment, Richard? Because partly we're looking forward here to COP26, and I know that under your leadership, Manchester has published an ambitious and an inspiring environmental plan that sees the city getting to net zero by 2038. What does the journey to net zero look like for Manchester? Are there distinctive features to that path?
I think there are, and not least because the plan for Manchester has been co-produced by a whole range of people. This is not just a plan from the City Council. And we first did this back in 2008-9 when we produced a plan to be zero carbon by 2050. We're slightly less ambitious then, although actually I think if we'd done better on that journey, we wouldn't be now needing to have a shorter time frame. But we said to a whole range of people, private sector, universities, environmental groups, community groups, that don't sit on the sidelines carping about climate change, zero carbon, join us and write the strategy. And that's what people did. And we've kept that up. We have a really active climate change partnership, supports a climate change agency. So we have an executive function that goes with that. It's got an independent chair currently. The senior partner of Arup in the city is chairing that. But we recognise that if we are going to tackle climate change, we have to engage people, because it's by and large not going to be us that does it. The City Council itself is responsible for around 2% of the emissions in the city. We've got to get at the other 98% somehow, and our approach is to do that. Some of it will depend on government decarbonising the power supply, the ability to be able to move to clean electric, although as a council we're trying to accelerate our process to that. Clearly, the rest of it then is transport and buildings. We aim to have any new building zero carbon by 2028, so 10 years ahead of that deadline. We're already getting zero carbon buildings, in fact, negative carbon, including, I went to visit a couple of social homes being built, which will be negative carbon. That includes the embedded carbon as well. So this is stuff that that can be done, but it will be done by building that partnership. At the moment, we've probably got somewhere like 20 to 25% of the city's emissions in that partnership. So the real task over the next few years is to get the other 75% in, and a lot of that is citizens themselves. So you can say probably about 25% of our emissions will come from citizens, their homes, their everyday use of transport and so on. And that's the task. We have to get into that.
Richard, this is absolutely fascinating, because I think what you've just described is an example of a place leadership approach that I think you've more or less invented in Manchester, which is the recognition that you may only directly control 2% of the emissions, but you need to build an alliance and a strategy that captures all of them. Therefore, it's your convening power as a city that's really at play here. And we salute you for the approach taken. And for those of you who haven't read the document, it's absolutely brilliant and inspiring, and I would encourage you to read it. Richard, let's come back to the citizens, though, because it sounds like you've done a great job in bringing, as it were, the activist community, the NGOs, the campaigners, the advocates, and the enlightened private sector. You've got them at your table. What is it that you need to do to get the community on side and on board, as it were, for climate change? How do you make sure that people stay engaged? And what is it that, as a city, you can really do to shape citizen behaviour?
Well, I think, again, you have to take a multiple approach to this. Lots of really good work taking place in schools where certainly young people tend to be far more willing to take on board the issues of climate change and to become advocates for tackling climate change as well. So I think all our schools are very much on this agenda. There's what we can do through regulation, and clearly local authorities, councils in the UK have limited power around regulation, but we are intending to have the whole city will be part of the clean air zone from April next year. Clearly planning requirements around buildings are going to be far more demanding in terms of zero carbon. I think we can do more on the physical environment of recognising that we are already having extreme weather events, and our environment needs to be able to deal with that. So we need more water sinks. We need more urban drainage systems that don't pour everything into our rivers and our drains and so on. But really, for the citizen, we have to stop hectoring them. That's not the way that works. We've got to tell a story about why tackling climate change is going to be good for them, good for their lives, good for their families. And by and large, you need to do that at a very local level. So one of the things we are doing is taking action on climate change down to all of our 32 wards, and at that level having neighbourhood plans about how we will involve citizens in tackling climate change. Also, you've got to give some real pluses that having a well-insulated home saves you money. It saves you on the bills and so on. We've got to be able to really tell that positive story about why tackling climate change is good for people. Threatening them doesn't work.
Absolutely, and your comments are so clear on the motivation of citizens. Are you optimistic, Richard, about this? Is this something where you feel that actually there is momentum and the majority of citizens are getting on board with this positive story about why it's good for them, good for planet, good for family, good for household? Do people get it?
We're going in the right direction, but I think if I was answering that question a few years ago, and I mean only 4 or 5 years ago, the answer to the question is about a third of the population get it, a third of the population are hostile to it, and a third of the population don't care. And actually, I think those proportions are changing, but it's more than a third of the population now get it. I still think there's a big chunk of even of that, whatever proportion it is, still think it's somebody else that has to do it rather than them. So I think we are making progress. We are making inroads into that. I think there is now a growing constituency of people who recognise that there is an urgent need to tackle climate change, but I still think we have a long way to go.
Richard, you spoke about public health right at the start, and I know that one of the arenas in which Manchester has been a pioneer is in active travel, really encouraging people to walk, to cycle, to scoot, to run, to use the journey to work, as it were, as part of a health pickup. Can you tell us a little bit about how that has gone in Manchester, and if you like, what's the next stage in all of that strategy?
Well, I'm going to start with leading by example, Greg. I'm just going to move my camera angle a little bit, and you'll see that's how I got to work this morning. And actually, if I'm in the town hall extension. Normally, I'll come either by bike or I will walk. I only live about 3.5 miles away, so it's not too demanding. It's an hour's walk. Well, it's 10 minutes in on the bike, it's 20 minutes home, because North Manchester has hills, and you go up going home down in the morning. But more generally, I think we are moving to, I think, a very big concentration on pedestrians, making it a lot easier to walk, particularly at either end of a journey. We are, and for an international audience, this will probably sound a little bit odd, but we are about to become the second city with regulated public transport, because London is the only place at the moment in the UK with regulated transport. We're in the process of regulating our public transport, which means we can have a more coherent pattern. We'll be able to link it with cycle hire schemes, cycle borrowing schemes, to positively encourage more active travel. We are slowly investing in segregated cycle routes. This is quite difficult, particularly for an old city, because we have very limited road width, and we're trying to maximise the use of that. So we are increasing the amount of segregated cycleways, and then it's cycle parking, ability to be able to have showers and all the other facilities, which are increasing quite significantly within the city centre. And of course, there is that element of people living close to work. So probably the most significant element is a city working age city centre and edge of city centre population who walk to work, and we're working to make their walking routes, the public realm that they use, far more attractive. So if you look at our economic recovery strategy for Manchester, there are 4 big plans in it. One's retrofit, by the way, of domestic properties to make them more energy efficient. But one of those 4 is public realm, improving the public. We see that as being a real economic boost, and that public realm is about certainly a place for people to be. It is very much about being able to walk.
Yeah, Richard, it's a classic example of something that Manchester consistently shows us, that something like public realm has an economic dimension, it has a transport dimension and a health dimension, all at the same time. And it's really interesting to see this. Going to the other end of the spectrum, Richard, I mean, one of the interesting things that Manchester's done over the period while you've been the leader is that it's been really successful in building an airport. Not just Manchester Airport, but now the Manchester Airport Group, with all of the airports that it owns. And I know that you've carefully stewarded the introduction of private capital into the group, but you retain a very strong shareholding there. Does that lead you to be also interested in net zero carbon aviation, the future of flight, the airport as a place? How do you see the airport and aviation in this broader picture of Manchester's future and the climate challenge?
Well, all of our airports are already operationally zero carbon and have been for some time. So that's the airports, but let's talk about aviation. Clearly, aviation is currently a relatively small proportion of transport emissions, but it is, or has been until COVID came along, a growing source of emissions, and predicted to grow quite significantly. So moving towards zero carbon aviation is, I think, really, really important. And at the same time, we don't want the ability to fly, the ability to have a holiday in the sun and so on, to become the preserve of the rich and the very, very small number of people who can afford to do it. I think the ability of lots and lots of people to be able to do that is really, really important. So we are seeing increasingly, driven by the economics of aviation, planes becoming far more fuel efficient. They're lighter, different materials, better engines, all of that. We are beginning to see, of course, the first electric planes, first hydrogen planes. At the moment, short journeys, small numbers of passengers. Over time, the technology will allow that to improve even further. And we are very much on a journey too, I think, to a zero carbon aviation. And there is that argument that goes on that there are a lot of environmental groups that say you shouldn't be expanding the airport, you shouldn't be allowing more people to fly. I fundamentally disagree with that. I think what we've got to be able to do is to expand our airports, allow more people to fly, but to be able to do that in an environmentally sound way, which means making aviation zero carbon, not stopping aviation.
Richard, thank you very much. It's a very, very clear statement. And of course, Connected Places Catapult is working hard on this issue as well. And we salute the efforts that you're taking. It's very important, I think.
Greg, and again, the airport group, and they say it is a private company, although we own, well, our economic share is 36%, our voting share is 50%. So we do have a significant influence over it. But the airport group has itself been taking nationally and internationally a leading role in trying to support the development of low emission, zero emission aviation.
Absolutely. And we look forward to more collaboration with you on those subjects, and of course directly with MAG. Now, ladies and gents, in a minute I'm going to shift the attention in the conversation with Richard towards digitization, the innovation economy, some of the issues Richard's already raised about the diversification of Manchester. I just want to remind you to start getting your questions ready and to put them into the Q&A section, and I'll put those questions to Richard when we get to the end of a few more questions that I'm going to ask, if that's okay. Richard, let's pick up then this story of Manchester and its strong digital ecosystem, which is really one of the leading digital ecosystems in the UK. And recently we heard from some of your partners and colleagues at Bruntwood that Manchester is actually the most important digital ecosystem in the whole of Europe. So how do you see your digital strategy emerging from this pandemic? How does it align with the principles of sustainability and resilience? And does being a digital city help you when you have a shock like a pandemic?
Okay, those a series of really complicated questions. Something I used to say quite regularly: if you were to ask any city in the world about what their big five growth areas were going to be over the next decade, they'd all say the same thing, because the growth areas are the growth areas. I think it's really important within, for example, something like the digital sector, which covers a vast array of activities, economic activities, precisely what your strengths are within that wide area. And I think that's something that Manchester has done. We've commissioned on a number of occasions independent work, overseen independently, to tell us what we're good at, what we're not good at, and what has the potential for growth. So we understand that we're good at machine learning, we're good at cyber security, we're good at big data, we're good at health data, understanding, we're good at digital marketing. There's a range of stuff that, and you could take that in any sector that we understand what we're good at. Clearly, we are in a world where digitally supported, digitally enabled becomes more and more important, and so it is a key element of our economy. There is a downside, of course, that all that digital stuff doesn't half consume a lot of energy. So getting a decarbonised electricity supply is really important around that. But how's it helped us deal with something like the COVID pandemic? Well, something that had been an ambition for quite a long time, but in the course of the pandemic, for the whole of Greater Manchester, we developed a single patient record, so that any health or care professional could access that record online. So instead of keeping multiple records all over the place, simple record. So in terms of supporting people, providing people with care packages or health support and whatever, that clearly made it a lot more simple and straightforward to do that. Clearly, in terms of vaccinations and so on, the ability to be able to target vaccination programs in the right places depends on knowing where we need to target it. And again, that requires collection and being able to manage data, and that's got to be all sorts of demographic data, where people live, what their age profile is, what their ethnicity is, all of that sort of stuff. So they're relatively simple examples, but they're examples of how digital helps us deal with supporting people in terms of their getting on with their lives, staying safe and well. I think how it will help us grow is that because of, I think we've built up both a reputation and a certain amount of capacity. It is even companies that themselves aren't based here will quite often base a big chunk of their digital capacity here. And what that gives is high value jobs that actually sustain other parts of the economy as well. So we have to decarbonise it, but the story is understand what it is that you're good at, because nowhere is good at everything. Exploit that which you're good at, and use it in a number of ways. Use it to grow your economy, but also use it to make a better city as well. I think compared to some other places that I can think, a place like Eindhoven, I think we've probably got a way to go in actually digitising the city, if you like, to be able to make it far easier for citizens to effectively self-manage their way around the city.
Richard, this is a fascinating way to put it, that the digitization is there both to help you deliver services to citizens, it's there to help you grow the economy, but it's also there in a sense to connect the community in one way or another and to empower them. Let me just ask you a little bit more about that, because I'm keen to know, does Manchester already have mechanisms to encourage digital platforms for community engagement in problem solving? Is digitized networking part of how you're driving this sort of localized climate emergency agenda? How does digital engage citizens in city solutions?
Yeah, well, I think you'll find that in active neighbourhoods now, that there are very large, and that they'll use a variety of platforms. Actually, probably still that Facebook is the most popular platform for that sort of engagement. But yes, they exist. We use them. We use them as a council. We will establish that. The most recent participation exercises we've done, and the last one was a refresh of our 10-year strategy. We had bigger response than we've ever had. Most of that response was digital, and of course it allows people to input and not simply comment on, to be able to tell us what they want to see within the city. And indeed, our current 10-year strategy, it's got another 3 years to run. We started off the process of writing it probably 6-7 years ago by asking the question, what is your dream Manchester? Not what sort of road network do you want, or what sort of houses do you want, but a question that encouraged people to dream about what sort of city they want. And the response we got was absolutely phenomenal. So yeah, but using digital means to allow people to have that two-way interchange or multiple way interchange is certainly something that we are doing and is growing.
Richard, thank you very much. It's very clear when you look at the data that we were presented with that Manchester is, a European leader, if not a world leader. And just recently, we at the Catapult ran an event with Media City UK in Salford, where hundreds of SMEs wanted to get involved in the sort of the digital platforms that you create there, and many of them coming from outside the UK. So are you doing something particular to promote Manchester's leadership as a digital city internationally? Is this a big marketing campaign, or is it a word of mouth? What do you do to develop that leadership position?
I think it's a mixture of both, really. Clearly, we do promote the city and have been promoting the city in international markets. But as do the companies promote themselves, the universities promote their digital offer. So We do it at a metropolitan area level as well as at a city level. So yes, we do all of that. We have Marketing Manchester, our marketing agency that will promote through its international strategy. Manchester is a digital city. Our inward investment agency will do likewise. But I think there is something else that goes with this, which has got absolutely nothing to do with our strengths as a digital city. And it is probably our cultural life. We've invested very heavily in culture, our nighttime economy, our sports, that what we have built is a city where young, skilled people wish to live. And in the modern world, lifestyle, quality of life is the most single important economic driver. So a lot of those digital companies come to Manchester because they know the talent pool that they need will be here or wants to come here.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very obvious thing in 2021 to say you create the city where the talent wants to be, and then that attracts the jobs that want the talent. But you seem to have known this before any other city really knew it. You know, Manchester's been doing this for at least 20 years. How did you know that this sort of place-led approach to talent creation and talent attraction would be the key sort of economic development strategy? Because it's so simple when you look at it, but on the other hand, it's very profound.
There are probably two things we started doing, maybe 30 years ago. One was, I suppose, symbols of a modern city. So it was a new arena, a new concert hall, actually a concert hall with a decent acoustic. We could hear our orchestras properly for the first time. It's an extension to the art gallery that was first planned in, I think, or first identified as being needed in 1892. So we got round to it in the 90s. So we started building those bits of the infrastructure of the city. We liberalised our nighttime economy. So we started to encourage the hospitality industry. We invested in events. So we will bring international events to the city. I suppose a couple of weeks ago, we had our international festival, which is an international festival like nobody else's international festival. It's distinctive. We recognise what are the distinctive characteristics of the city, and we amplify those distinctive characteristics. Probably the other significant bit was what we did in a neighbourhood immediately to the south of the city centre, Hume, which in 1990 was one of the worst places to live in Europe, never mind the UK. And we rebuilt that on almost in its entirety on what sort of place do people want to live in, with simple design principles about that. And what was a place that, apart from people maybe for a couple of years after university, anybody else wants to get out of, is now once again a thriving collection of neighbourhoods in that area. But that was all about livability. So we started working on it a long time ago. And like everything else, we've learnt about it as we went along. 30 years ago, quality of life, place was not the driver than it is now. You were still in that a world where it would have been skills, it would have been infrastructure, it would have been innovation, all of which are still important, by the way. In some cases, it was still about having the plot that got all the services in that you could build something on. It was that sort of world. So we've developed, as our understanding and as the world's changed, and particularly the economy of the city has changed, our understanding has changed as well. But we started putting some of those building blocks in 30 years ago and have spent all our time really, a willingness to learn, I think, is what it is. I talked earlier about getting independent challenge. The Manchester Independent Economic Review that we did in 2008, we repeated 10 years later. Very high profile academics as a steering group of that, economists, and we gave them free license to tell us what's right and tell us what's what's wrong.
Mm.
As far as I know, nowhere else, certainly in the UK, has still done and been prepared to invest in that sort of exercise. So, yes, we will market ourselves, but what we have, I think, is a tinge of reality, more than a tinge of reality, really, so that our plans are really based on evidence and substance.
Richard, it's another inspiring part of the cycle that Manchester's been through, that you have invited this challenge, you've welcomed it, you've wanted to be evidence-led, you've brought some of the best minds in the world to talk about Manchester and its future, and you can see the fruits of it now. And I think that what you've just been saying about the connection between livability and place leadership is not always well understood, but you've really captured it there. Richard, I want to go on to talk about leveling up with you. And maybe there are two parts to this question, if you don't mind. So part one is really, do we understand what leveling up really needs to be? And is it clear to your mind, I'm sure it is, the role that Manchester can play in the economic performance of the whole of the North? I'd love to hear your thoughts about what's important on that. And then I want to ask you about how leveling up relates to the climate challenge. How does, the transition to net zero, how does it combine with leveling up? And are there trade-offs there as you see it? So can we start with generally leveling up? What do you think the agenda needs to be?
You can define this in a number of ways, and I think the more traditional route, and not always the most helpful route, is around productivity. And that I live in the north of England. If you take the north of England as a whole, productivity in the north of England is a lot lower than that in London and the southeast. And you have to be careful. The productivity of London has been distorted by things like the City of London, which looks really good in terms of economic productivity figures, but actually doesn't produce very much at all in the real world. But productivity is, I think, one measure. I think perhaps a more significant measure for me is that we are, the north of England is subsidised by parts of other parts of the country. We are a net recipient of other people's taxes to pay for our public services. I think for levelling up for me would be to move to a north of England where we are a net contributor, not a net recipient, and similarly for cities in the north where levels of benefit dependency of individuals and families are higher than other parts of the country, that we reduce that benefit dependency, that people are able to have the work to be able to earn enough to not require that public tax support. So I can look at levelling up both at a macro scale about tax subsidy, and also at a micro and individual scale around tax subsidy as well. That's not the place we want to be. So we want to have an economy, our own tax base, that allows us not to be in that position. And what does it mean in practice? Well, we've been talking about the growth of Manchester over perhaps the last 20 years. In reality, our population started to grow again about 20 years ago, and has been growing about 2% every year. But that's after a period of 70, 80 years of decline. And you can take actually the decline of the north of England as an industrial powerhouse probably over that similar period of time. So in terms of reversing that, the 3-year get something done before the next general election gimmick is not going to work. That we started again probably 20, 25 years ago, thinking in 10, 20-year timescales, that if we're going to make a difference, if we don't think in those sorts of timescales, it just won't work. And I think an approach to levelling up the North, which using a different language, was, I think, set out very clearly in the Northern Independent Economic Review that I think 2016 that was published. And that set out programs of activity to be undertaken that said, if we do the right things, then by round about 2025, we will start to see the benefits. So 10 years before you start to see the benefits. Since then, we've done virtually none of the right things. because those right things require investment to do those. We've done some of them. We've done some work around skills, but certainly the infrastructure investment we haven't done. But ultimately, if we are going to get levelling up, is that we need long-term serious investment in increasing skill levels. We need long-term serious investment in infrastructure. That's transport infrastructure principally, but also to a certain extent digital infrastructure. And we need long-term investment in the supply side of the economy. And the supply side will include culture, it will include research, will include housing, all of those things, because those are the things about returning to an earlier theme that are to do with it being a good place to live. So all of that requires investment over a long period of time. There is a positive thing from UK government now, is that the Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government is talking about every place having a 10 to 20 year plan. That is the right place to be. But once you've got the 10 to 20 year plan, whilst you can fund it by opportunistic means, which we've done as a city for a long time. We've always operated on long-term plans, and then when we see an opportunity, grab it. Actually, if the government's serious about levelling up, they have to at least fund the basics of those plans in a far more serious long-term way. In the way that actually happened with the urban development companies that we had in the the first half of the century, actually, the first 10 years of the century, 10-year programs funded.
Richard, it's very clear what you've said, and the way you've linked the place-based aspects with the tax dependency, the productivity issues, and then the practical program. Very, very clear. Thank you. So how does climate change interface with this as you see it? Is the transition to net zero something that helps levelling up, or does levelling up help that, or are the two things somehow opposed to each other, or can they be combined?
I think, first of all, we need to grow the economy of the north of England, and Manchester can support certainly the rest of the north of England in the way that London has supported, perhaps not consciously, but the growth of all the towns around London. You've seen over the past 15, 20 years, the fastest growth in the UK's economy has not been London itself, it's been towns around it that have been effectively feeding off London. I think Manchester can have a similar impact for a large chunk of the north of England, and indeed already does to a certain extent with some of the towns in Greater Manchester. So all of that, I think, does entail growth. I think you can see zero carbon as either a threat to the economy or an opportunity for the economy. I think we very much see it as an opportunity in that building wind turbines, doing PVs, retrofitting homes, clean buses, actually for the north of England, zero carbon energy, all of that, particularly from the offshore wind. All of these are opportunities to grow the economy. So I see zero carbon and a growing economy going very much hand in hand. But that also requires us to make some choices about the sort of economy we want to grow. So when we talk about growth, there are various ways of describing this, but we ought to be talking about good growth. And good growth will be zero carbon growth. So yes, I think we can do both together.
Richard, thank you very much. Very, very clear again and compelling. I've got one more question of the questions that I suggested I wanted to ask you, but we've got 5 or 6 questions already coming in from our audience, which I'll pop to you afterwards. But can we just go for in a sense, what I think is the big agenda here, which is that you've been leader of Manchester City Council for 25 years. You've already spoken about some of the things that you've done, the coalition building, the focus on place, the understanding of livability, your approach to taking challenging, independent evidence. There's so many things that are part of your leadership model. But When you think about what the rest of the world can learn from Manchester's experience over that time, what are the leadership lessons that you would really pick out and prioritize?
Oh, I think it's all about teams. Nobody does much on their own. It is about teams. It's bringing people together. It is those co-design processes. It is the willingness to take constructive criticism. It is about lived experience. It's something that's become very, very important to us. It's starting from strengths. We very much have an asset-based approach to the growth of the city. That everybody's got something to contribute, rather than having a pathological approach to the problems that the city faces. We look at it from a different point of that point of view of we can do rather than we can't do. I think in terms of I suppose the individual leadership. It is being the willingness to think long term, as a politician, particularly to think beyond electoral cycles, to have plans that go over that period of time. And fundamentally is having that very clear sense of a shared vision, and the shared vision is important, of where we want to go, where we want to be as a city.
Richard, I'm going to re-listen to those words over and over again, because there's so much in what you say there about this rather unique skill set that a city leader needs to have. Richard, we have quite a few questions coming in from our delegates, and I'm going to just read a couple of them out to you one at a time. So one person says that they've heard that Manchester as a city was very proactive in enabling its universities to merge and to reform, if you like, trying to build scale around your universities. How important was that, and what did you actually do?
I formed a view that for us to grow the sort of economy we wanted, that having a world-class research-based university would help enormously. Whilst we had some strengths in the research base, particularly at the Victoria University of Manchester, to give it its full title at the time, and some of that stuff was world-class, overall it wasn't. And one of the things it lacked was the scale to be genuinely world-class. Worked out there was duplication between it and the University of Manchester Institute of Science and Technology, that if we merge the two, then that would give us the critical mass to be the potential to be world-class. We had two vice-chancellors that shared that vision. I think we're very fortunate that they were both planning to retire at the same time, so they weren't competing in that, and they provided real leadership within this as well. But we actively campaigned to get those two universities to merge, and that did succeed in creating the new University of Manchester, which generally scores on most tables, certainly in the probably the 30s in terms of world-class universities, has a number of genuinely world-leading areas in both life sciences, digital, and advanced materials in particular. So, yeah, with that, we campaigned for it, we supported it, worked with both universities to get their councils and all the other people who had to vote for it to vote for it. And have worked with them in bringing investment as well. So things like the National Graphene Institute, for example, is something that the City Council was very instrumental in getting that brought and developed in Manchester.
It's a perfect example, Richard, isn't it, of bold leadership that does something different, merges two universities, and it's actually worked in the most incredible ways.
It has worked, probably worked better than we might have envisaged it working, really. But again, these are long haul things. So the merger took place, I think, probably round about 2004, I think it was. Mm-hmm. The new engineering block that allows the university to withdraw from some of the older buildings on the UMIS site to consolidate and have those sorts of facilities is only opening this year. So again, you've got to be able to think in those 15, 20-year timescales. So the merger it might happen technically on one day, but actually putting it into effect is a long haul, and we're still in the middle of that long haul.
Yes, there's a lot of what we call cathedral thinking going on in Manchester, thinking about the long term. Now, one of our other delegates, Richard, has said, you mentioned in passing that Manchester's a great city of sport. And as far as this person can see it, Manchester has an outsized reputation in sport, given the size of the city and its population. They ask, how has that come about? And how do you use sport to try to create the city that you're really trying to build?
Okay, the core of this is the Commonwealth Games, which took place in Manchester in 2002. We had two failed Olympic bids before that. We think we were lucky and that by bidding for the Olympics, we got quite a number of sporting resources, but we didn't actually have to hold the Olympics. So, but bidding helped us enormously. But when we got the Commonwealth Games, we had a number of things we did. First of all, we had a 7-year program of sport leading up to the Commonwealth Games. We had a rule that we weren't going to build any white elephants. So any facilities we built for the Commonwealth Games, we were going to know exactly what we were going to do with them afterwards. And we will put together programs of international sport, national competition, and so on every year from the Commonwealth Games on to make sure we got the maximum use out of those facilities. We supported some sporting bodies coming to the cities. Probably the most notable is British cycling, which effectively became a world sporting phenomenon. I think in the Beijing Olympics, if they'd been a country, there would have been something like 6th or 7th in the medals table just on their own. So we've invested in facilities. We've invested in grassroots sports. Every time we have an international event, part of the program for that international event is about supporting club level, community level, grassroots level, and the layers in between. So we've built in sporting development programs as part of that. And that's how we've become a major sporting city. And clearly we have a couple of reasonably significant sporting clubs that operate in a purely commercial way, but one of those, Manchester City, is our tenant, and we get an income from them that goes back into sport. So that helped. We've also set up an apparatus that helps us pay for that stuff as well.
And as you said earlier, Richard, this also underlines the livability approach that you're taking to it. Blends into that, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And clearly, people will see Manchester as a footballing city because of the two big clubs, but we have sport at every level, certainly up to national level in pretty much everything, really. But we have the National Squash Centre, the National Taekwondo Centre, the National Cycling Centre. We have a regional basketball facility. We have in our aquatic centre, we have national swimming squads training there, I think for water polo and Paralympic swimming. The Commonwealth Games, by the way, was the first international multi-sport event that was wholly inclusive. We didn't separate off the para sports from the other sports. So we have an inclusive approach as well.
Again, Manchester as a pioneer there. Richard, last quick question, if I may. One of our delegates says that they really understood your comments about the future of high streets. They share your concerns, but do you think that perhaps this shift that's going on in retail presents opportunities to reinvent the high streets to do other things? And if so, what are the things you want to see them doing?
Well, I stick with retail itself. There are, even pre-COVID, a number of developers, including our own joint venture with Abu Dhabi United Group, were basically only taking independents as tenants. So weren't bothering about the old style of the covenant, which I think covenants have just been proved to be worth absolutely nothing. So forgetting about that, but seeing the ground floors of buildings as being amenity value for the people that go above. And this has reversed the economic equation. Instead of being the ground floor being the anchor for it with everything else above a bonus, it's now the other way way round. The ground floor becomes amenity space. So a number of commercial developers are doing that, and what that is slowly doing is building a supply chain of independents, food and beverage, retail, services that will effectively make a far more interesting place, but actually make sure we continue to have vitality on the in the shop fronts of these. Again, I think we will increasingly see community services. I think we'll see arts and culture occupying our high streets, but that will all be driven by that desire to have, even in the private sector, even the commercial sector, the development industry, something that creates interest, that makes it far more attractive for their tenants to come to. It's beginning to happen. I think that's a real opportunity over the next few years.
Richard, that's a really compelling vision to end our conversation on. Thank you very much for joining this City Leader Dialogue. Thank you to Sir Richard Leese, the leader of the City of Manchester.
Thanks very much, Greg. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you.